It was 2:03 in the morning, a cold Tuesday in late September, when my entire house was jolted by a sound no off-grid solar engineer ever wants to hear. A screaming surge alarm, a high-pitched digital banshee wailing from the heart of my system console. My eyes snapped open, a knot of pure dread forming in my stomach. I stumbled out of bed, half asleep, and stared in disbelief as the console screen flashed red, showing an unexplained load spike of over 11 kilowatts, nearly 3 times the average nightly draw. The source? A private outdoor charging port. Confused, then furious, I threw on a hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and stormed out into the crisp night air, my mind racing. What could possibly be pulling that much power? My breath fogged in front of me as I rounded the corner of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. And that's when I saw it, a sleek white Tesla Model X, glowing under the moonlight like a silent, expensive predator, its charging cable plugged neatly into my personal port. And standing beside it, arms crossed, the smug look of someone who owned not just the street but the entire galaxy, was Brenda from the Willow Creek Community Association. She looked me dead in the eye, not a hint of shame, and said, "Your charger wasn't being used overnight." I figured I'd save a few bucks. My mind went blank for a second. I blinked, wondering if this was some bizarre fever dream, but the cold air and the humming of the car were very real. That single entitled sentence, that was the moment everything rewired for me, the moment I understood just how far some people would go. See, I built this entire solar grid myself. Every panel, every battery bank, every inch of wiring. It was all my work. As an electrical systems engineer, I didn't just want to save on bills. I wanted independence. I wanted to be free from the power company, free from the grid, free from the constant stream of bureaucracy and paperwork. And here was this woman, who had already tried to fine me for having unapproved solar panels visible from the street, now quietly jacking electricity for her luxury car, like she was borrowing a cup of sugar. My system had safeguards, of course, but I hadn't designed it to handle this level of sheer audacity. Not yet. I'd met Brenda a year ago at the annual HOA meeting, where she volunteered to be treasurer, and was immediately elected by default because nobody else wanted the job. That should have been our first warning. She started referring to herself as the executive officer of community standards, and began throwing her weight around, slapping fines on people for the most ridiculous things. Mailboxes not being the correct shade of beige, kids' bikes left on porches, and her favorite, excessively green grass, which was apparently unfair to other residents during a dry summer. Most people just rolled their eyes and complied, but I made the mistake of installing a weatherproof battery housing unit near my fence. It matched my house, it was legally permitted, but according to Brenda, it invited property theft and visual disharmony. That's when she first tried to flex her fake authority, telling me to move the unit or face escalating fees. I just showed her my city-approved permits and explained that my system was off-grid, fully compliant, and none of her damn concern. She didn't like that. The next week I received a formal HOA warning letter, printed in Comic Sans of all fonts. I just laughed, tossed it into my shredder, and carried on with my life, assuming that was the end of it. But this wasn't about aesthetic preferences anymore. She had crossed the line from an annoying busybody to a full-blown power thief. As I stood in my driveway staring at her car, I asked her if she was serious. "You can't just plug into someone's private energy system, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She looked confused, then her face morphed into a smug smirk. "You put it on the outside of your house," she said, as if that was an open invitation. "And since we're all part of the same community, technically the energy belongs to everyone." The sheer stupidity of her logic was stunning. She was treating my custom-engineered system like a shared garden hose. I tried to explain again that the HOA had nothing to do with my power grid, but she just rolled her eyes and said, "You should be grateful I'm charging clean. I'm not burning gas." That was the moment. That was the exact moment I knew this was war. I didn't shout. I didn't yank the cable out. I didn't throw a fit. I just walked back inside, opened my console, and meticulously recorded the logs, taking screenshots of every single detail. Then I pulled up the surveillance footage from my driveway cams. Sure enough, There she was on multiple occasions, sneaking into my yard at night, plugging in, then casually walking away like it was a public outlet. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. The next morning, I walked over to her house, knocked on the door, and calmly laid everything out again. I offered to let it go if she agreed to stop and reimburse a portion of what she had taken. I even printed the data for her. She just smirked and said, "Oh, please. You really think I'm paying you for sunlight?" Then she slammed the door in my face. Later that week, she had the audacity to file a complaint against me through the HOA, claiming I was hoarding renewable energy in an exclusionary manner. I thought it was a joke until I got another violation notice in my mailbox. My blood boiled. I wasn't about to play defense anymore. That night, I decided I'd had enough. She wanted power? Fine, I'd give her all the power she could possibly handle. I spent the next few evenings designing a dummy port, a decoy outlet rigged with a safe but intentionally unstable surge loop. The moment she plugged into it, it would trip a concealed relay that dumped a non-lethal, chaotic voltage through the line. It wouldn't harm her or the car permanently, but it would absolutely fry the charger and scare the living daylights out of her. All within technical safety limits, all completely legal. By Friday, the trap was in place, hidden behind a faux access panel that looked just like my real charger. A big yellow sign warned "Private Grid, do not use," but I knew she'd ignore it. Brenda never saw a boundary she didn't want to cross. I didn't have to wait long. Saturday night, around 1:40 a.m., my console lit up again with a surge alert. I leaned back in my chair, smiled, and brought up the camera feed. And there she was, Brenda in pajama pants and a hoodie, humming to herself while plugging her cable into my decoy port. 10 seconds later, the Tesla jolted, hissed, and shot a blinding arc of sparks out of the charger socket. Brenda screamed and stumbled back, falling onto her lawn like a cartoon villain. The car went dark. The camera captured every second. And in that moment, with the night glowing like the 4th of July and Brenda yelling, "It's broken!" into the darkness, I realized I had just declared electrical war on the most entitled person in the neighborhood. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I expected retaliation. What I didn't expect was a mob. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard a knock on the door. A rapid, angry thumping, the kind that announces someone not looking for a conversation, but a confrontation. I opened it to find Brenda, arms folded, flanked by 2 HOA board members I barely recognized. Her Tesla sat in the driveway behind her like a wounded animal, the charger still dangling from its port, blackened and limp. Brenda's expression looked like she had bitten into a lemon soaked in vinegar. "You tampered with my car," she snapped without so much as a good morning. One of the board members, a guy named Leonard who always wore sandals with socks, stepped forward nervously and said, "We just want to talk about what happened last night." I told them to wait and stepped inside. I came back with a folder. Inside were printouts of every recorded instance Brenda had used my power port without permission, with timestamps and video stills included. I handed it to Leonard, who blinked at the growing pile of paper like I had just handed him a lawsuit, which wasn't too far from reality. Brenda snatched one of the papers and held it up. "This doesn't prove anything. It was outside, no lock, no sign until recently." I gestured toward the video camera mounted over the driveway and said, "There's audio, too. In case you forgot, last night you said, and I quote, 'I figured I'd save a few bucks.'" Leonard's face fell slightly, and the second board member, Diane, looked downright uncomfortable. Brenda's confidence cracked, but she wasn't the type to retreat. "I'm filing an HOA complaint for sabotage. You damaged my property," she said, her voice shaking. I just shrugged. "Your unauthorized use tripped a surge on a decoy port. That's not my problem. It's documented. You ignored the warnings. You trespassed. And if you want to talk damage, let's talk about what your charging did to my battery bank." She didn't care. She was already turning back to her car, calling someone on speaker, and telling them to prepare a formal incident response. That same afternoon, I received a hand-delivered letter, another violation notice from the HOA, this time for installing dangerous electrical equipment without board approval. I laughed so hard I almost dropped it in the recycling bin. Instead, I kept it, knowing it would look fantastic stapled to the counter-complaint I was preparing. I dealt with technical disputes my whole career, but I never imagined I'd be documenting an energy theft case for neighborhood drama. Still, I knew how to play the long game. I reached out to my lawyer, a former litigator who now handled property law and tech infrastructure disputes. After reviewing my footage, logs, and the HOA's absurd violation letters, he agreed we had a case for trespassing, utility theft, and defamation. But before we went that route, he advised one more thing. Put Brenda in a legal corner first. Let her show her cards. The HOA's weakness is their paper trail. They don't want lawsuits. They want compliance. And they mess up when someone fights back with evidence. So I got organized. I printed everything. Every voltage spike, every video frame, every recorded word. I sent a cease and desist letter through my lawyer, delivered to Brenda and CC'd to the HOA board. Within it, I included a formal demand to stop all attempts to access my energy infrastructure or face civil litigation. That was the legal part. For the fun part, I installed a digital display sign at the edge of my property, powered by the solar grid, of course. Cycled messages like private energy zone, trespassers will be fried legally, and stealing sunlight. Really, Brenda? It was cheeky. It was bright. It was impossible to miss. And boy, did it stir the pot. By the weekend, people were talking. Neighbors began stopping by to ask what the drama was about. I didn't spread anything, but the footage from the Tesla Zap had apparently made it into the hands of some teenagers across the street, who edited it with dramatic music and uploaded it to social media. The video, titled "Tesla Brenda Gets What She Deserves," exploded. Within days, it had over 2 million views. Suddenly, Brenda wasn't just the local HOA nuisance. She was internet famous in the worst way possible. The clip showed her plugging in confidently, then jumping back, screaming as sparks lit up her luxury car like a Christmas tree. My sign in the background made it even better. The caption read, "That's what you get for stealing volts, Brenda." The attention didn't help her case. While she marched around the neighborhood trying to restore her shattered pride, the rest of the HOA board began receiving angry emails from residents who were tired of her antics. A few even thanked me for standing up to her. One guy, Fred, from down the street brought me a 6-pack of beer and said, "You're the hero we didn't know we needed." I wasn't interested in heroism. I was interested in accountability. So when the HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss the energy situation, I showed up ready. The meeting was held in the community center. Brenda sat at the front like a queen on trial, face tense, eyes darting around the room. I sat near the back with my folder. Leonard opened by reading the complaints filed, mine included, and then invited Brenda to explain herself. She began with the usual nonsense. I believed the charger was community accessible due to its external location. There were no initial warnings posted. I only used it during off-peak hours. Then she got defensive. He deliberately tampered with the system to cause damage. He humiliated me in front of everyone. This is harassment. I stood, asked to be heard, and was granted the floor. I calmly laid out the facts. Dates, footage, logs. I explained the concept of a closed solar grid, the risks of overdraw, the costs involved. I handed out packets to every board member, each one labeled with an index. I ended by pointing out the sign that had been installed before the final incident, and reminded them of the cease and desist letter now on record. The room was silent. Brenda tried to interrupt, but Leonard shut her down. "Brenda, you were told not to use that port. You ignored it. This wasn't a mistake. It was repeated unauthorized access." The vote that followed was swift. The board suspended Brenda from her treasurer role pending further review. The violation against me was retracted. An apology was recommended, though no one expected her to deliver one. As I left the meeting, I passed Brenda in the parking lot. She glared at me, arms tight across her chest. "This isn't over," she hissed. I smiled and replied, "No, it's just beginning." Because what she didn't know was that I had one more trick up my sleeve. And her Tesla might have sparked, but the real fireworks hadn't even started yet. I thought maybe, just maybe, after the public humiliation and the board suspension, Brenda would take the L and retreat into the background like most people do when they become a walking meme. But Brenda was not like most people. She didn't just double down. She went full nuclear. 2 days after the HOA meeting, I walked out to grab my mail and noticed something strange. My solar control panel's protective casing had been tampered with. The lock had scratches on it like someone tried to wedge it open. That casing was custom fitted and bolted tight with tamper-proof screws, and only I had the key. My stomach turned. Someone had tried to access the core of my grid system, not just the charging port. This was the brain of the whole operation. I ran back inside and pulled the security footage from my backyard camera, one of the many I had installed after the previous incident. There, clear as daylight at 2:46 a.m., was Brenda, dressed in all black like she was auditioning for a low-budget spy movie, crouching beside my panel, using a small tool to try and pry open the lock. She kept looking over her shoulder, then at one point cursed out loud when her screwdriver slipped. She had no gloves, no mask, just pure arrogant confidence. I watched her struggle for a few minutes, then give up and storm off, but not before flipping off the camera like it was personal. I sat back, breathing slowly, trying to decide if I was more impressed by her persistence or disgusted by her stupidity. She had already been suspended from the HOA board, was facing civil action, and had her Tesla half-fried on camera, and still she thought she could sneak onto my property and tamper with an electrical system she clearly didn't understand. If she had succeeded, she could have shorted out a major segment of my battery bank, maybe even caused an electrical fire. At that point, it wasn't just entitlement. It was criminal recklessness. That night, I backed up all the video evidence and sent it to my lawyer. Then I called the local sheriff's office. The deputy who came out was named Morales, and he was one of those rare types, calm, intelligent, and genuinely amused by stupidity. After reviewing the footage, he just shook his head and said, "Well, she's got guts. I'll give her that. No brains, but guts." He took a statement, marked it as trespassing and attempted vandalism, and assured me they'd pay Brenda a visit. Sure enough, the next day, 2 patrol cars parked in front of her house. I watched from my office window as she stood on her porch in fuzzy slippers, arguing with the officers while holding a cup of herbal tea like it was a shield. Her voice carried loud enough for me to hear her say the words, "This is harassment. He's weaponizing the system against me." That was rich coming from someone who had literally tried to invade my property twice and siphoned off dozens of dollars worth of power over weeks. I figured that was the end of it. Law enforcement was involved now. She'd have to back off. But Brenda didn't back off. Oh, she played her final card. She called the local news. 2 days later, a crew from a regional station showed up in our neighborhood. A silver van with a satellite dish pulled up, and a chipper-looking reporter named Chase Lambert stepped out, holding a mic and blinking under the hot sun. He was followed by a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was working on my porch when they approached. Chase gave me a polite smile and said, "Hi there. We're doing a piece on neighborhood disputes and energy access. Do you have a few minutes to chat?" I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Brenda's your source." He chuckled awkwardly and said, "Well, we've spoken to a few residents. I told him I'd be happy to talk on one condition, that I got to show him my side of the story with documentation." He agreed. So I invited him into my workspace and walked him through the whole setup. My off-grid solar array, the smart inverter logs, the surveillance footage, the tamper attempt, and even the viral video of the Tesla spark incident. Chase's eyes got wider with each layer of evidence. The cameraman, who had barely said a word, finally asked, "Wait, she really thought this belonged to the HOA?" I nodded, and she tried to steal it repeatedly. This wasn't about community power. It was about entitlement. Chase left with more than enough to rethink his angle. That night, the segment aired, and it was not the story Brenda had hoped for. The report was surprisingly fair. It opened with her speaking about shared community resources and a hostile neighbor, but then cut to the sheriff explaining that Brenda was under investigation for trespassing. Then it jumped to me explaining off-grid systems and showing video proof. The anchor wrapped it up by saying, "In this case, the sun may be free, but the infrastructure isn't." I laughed so hard I almost dropped my drink. Brenda's expression in the interview was priceless. Nervous, twitchy, the look of someone realizing they'd overplayed their hand. Brenda wasn't finished yet. I could feel it. She wasn't the type to surrender, but with every failed attempt, she was running out of cards to play. I later learned she put her house up for sale, claiming she needed a change of scenery. but everyone knew the truth. Her reputation was shot, her influence obliterated, and her ego permanently scorched. The house lingered on the market, too. Buyers kept pulling out, citing neighborhood gossip as a concern. One real estate agent even admitted that the viral video had affected interest. "People ask about the crazy Tesla lady," she said. "It's kind of become folklore." I didn't gloat much, but I wasn't shy about protecting what I'd built either. I continued refining the system, added a new backup battery array, upgraded the smart load balancer, and expanded the decoy port just in case someone else thought about trying their luck. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Once you've had someone crawl around your yard with a screwdriver and garden shears pretending to be a crusader for communal electricity, you tend to learn your lesson. Then came the letter. This time it wasn't from Brenda. It was from the city. Apparently, they'd seen the news segment, read the follow-up blog posts, and even heard about the HOA reforms. They wanted to nominate me for a local sustainability award. I laughed out loud when I read it, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I realized how far we'd come. From a woman plugging her car into someone else's power outlet like it was her personal socket, to a conversation about independence, boundaries, and the importance of owning your energy. And if that conversation had to begin with a little fire and a fried Tesla cable, so be it. The award ceremony was held at the Civic Center. It was low-key. Nothing fancy, folding chairs, a modest stage, and a few plaques handed out to people making eco-friendly efforts in the city. When they called my name, I walked up to polite applause, accepted the plaque, and kept my speech short. I said, "Respect your neighbors, respect the grid, and never underestimate the pettiness of people who don't understand either." That got a few laughs. Even the mayor chuckled. When I returned home that night, I stood in front of my property and looked at the system I had built. The panels, the batteries, the inverters, all glowing steady and clean. I thought about all the drama, the schemes, the sabotage, and the sparks. And then I thought about the final image of Brenda, covered in mulch, screaming at an air horn, the cords of her empire fraying in the dirt. She thought power meant control. She thought she could just take and take without consequence. But she didn't understand that real power doesn't come from a title, or a vote, or a charger you didn't ask permission to use. It comes from knowing what's yours, defending it with facts, and letting the voltage do the rest. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, and my grid kicked into its nightly sequence, I leaned on the gate and smiled. I didn't need to say anything. The current spoke for itself. But here's the thing. It's been months. Brenda's house finally sold, and the new family seems nice, but the legend lives on. The trophy I made, that glass-encased melted charger cable, it's become a landmark. People stop and take pictures. Kids point at it, and it got me thinking, was what I did justified? Did I go too far? Or was it the only way to teach someone like that a lesson they'd never forget? In a world where some people believe everything should be communal, and others want to protect what they've built, where do we draw the line? I'd love to hear what you guys think. Did I serve justice, or did I just stoop to her level? Let me know in the comments below.